I was 28 years old, standing in my kitchen holding a mug of chamomile tea, when my entire future collapsed into 12 words on a phone screen. Wedding's off, expect a call from my lawyer, no phone call, no conversation, no goodbye. Just a text. Cold, clean, final. The mug slipped from my fingers, and for a long moment the sound of it hitting the floor was the only thing I could hear in that apartment. My name is Sarah Merritt, and what happened next didn't just break my heart, it changed who I am forever. Within hours, the full picture emerged, and it was worse than I could have imagined. Daniel hadn't ended things on his own. Behind him, pulling the strings with a steady hand and a practiced smile, was his mother, Catherine, the woman who had hugged me at every family dinner, who had called me over Sunday brunch that I already felt like a daughter. That same woman had decided I wasn't good enough for her son. But Catherine wasn't working alone. My younger sister Mara, my maid of honor, my supposed best friend, hadn't just stood by and watched. She had stepped in, into my dress fittings, into my vendor calls, into my seating charts. 3 weeks after my wedding was canceled, Mara walked down the aisle at the same venue, on the same date I'd booked, with the same florist, the same band, and vows that sounded like rough drafts of mine. I wasn't heartbroken. I was erased. And standing in the hollow silence of my apartment, staring at walls where wedding photos should have been, I made a decision. I wasn't going to disappear quietly. I was going to find out exactly how deep this went. And then I was going to burn it all down, legally. Looking back, the warning signs were always there. I just kept explaining them away. Every family holiday followed the same choreography. Mara arrived late, dressed like she was heading somewhere more important, and the room shifted the way rooms do when the favorite child walks in. My mother's face lit up. Mine was already in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, making sure everything was ready. She's fine, Mom would say. Sarah handles things. It was meant as a compliment. It never felt like one. When Daniel proposed, I genuinely believed things would change. Instead, the dynamic just found new arenas to play out in. At my engagement party, Catherine pulled me aside. Her champagne glass was perfectly still in her hand, the mark of a woman who never loses composure. Daniel could have done better, she said, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. Pretty is easy. Position takes generations. I told Daniel that night. He laughed it off. That's just how she talks, he said. I should have walked out the door then. At my gown fitting, Mara slipped into the same dress just to see how it looked. The bridal consultant clasped her hands together. Stunning. You look just like the bride. Mara twirled in the mirror, and I stood half zipped, watching my own reflection grow smaller. At the rehearsal dinner, my place card was at the far end of the room, next to the kitchen doors where servers pushed through with trays that nearly grazed my shoulder. I laughed at jokes no one heard. I raised a glass no one returned. I told myself it was nerves, tradition, the natural awkwardness of merging families. But these weren't accidents. They were tests, rehearsals for replacement. And I kept passing them in the worst possible way, by staying quiet. After the cancellation, silence became something I wore like a coat I couldn't take off. Family group chats kept buzzing without me. Mara posted photos with the centerpieces I had chosen, wearing earrings Daniel had gifted me 2 Christmases ago. They didn't even bother being subtle. The theft was almost casual, like they'd never expected me to notice, or had decided it didn't matter if I did. For weeks, I moved through my life like I was watching it from the outside. Sleepless at 2 a.m., scrolling through images of a wedding that had been mine in every sense except the final one. But grief, if you let it, eventually stops being heavy and starts being sharp. I began to remember things differently. Catherine's oddly specific questions about my savings. Mara offering to help coordinate with vendors, then going quiet for days before returning the files. The sudden flatness in Daniel's voice starting about 6 weeks before the cancellation. The way he stopped meeting my eyes when we talked about the future. I started keeping records, screenshots, emails, receipts. At first, it felt like paranoia dressed up as productivity. But my gut was louder than my doubt. The call came at midnight. I almost didn't answer. But something in me, some version of myself that still needed closure, picked up. Daniel didn't say hello. He just said, I'm sorry. Then for the next 30 minutes, everything I'd pieced together became confirmed fact. Catherine had threatened to cut him off entirely if he married me. She told him I was a liability. Emotionally, financially, socially. And Mara, who had sat across from me at coffee dates and listened to me confess my deepest insecurities about the wedding, about myself, about whether I was enough, had been reporting those conversations back to Catherine. Every private fear I'd whispered to my sister had become ammunition in a case being built against me. Daniel said he still loved me. He said it like it was supposed to help. He chose the inheritance, he chose the approval, he chose the path that required the least courage. And I hung up without another word. The tears came later. But in that exact moment, sitting in the dark with my phone still warm in my hand, what I felt wasn't grief. It was the cold, clarifying quiet of finally knowing the truth. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't fragile. I had been methodically dismantled by the people who were supposed to love me most. And if someone erases you carefully enough, they leave a trail. All I had to do was follow it. 3 weeks later, an unmarked envelope arrived in my mailbox, plain white, block letters, no return address, just my name on the front, like a quiet accusation. Inside were photocopied medical records. Mine, a procedure I'd had years earlier, intimate and private, the kind of detail only a doctor or a trusted family member should ever have seen. At the bottom of the page, someone had written in blue pen, "She used this against you." I didn't sleep that night. I combed through every memory I could find of Catherine asking about my health. The way Mara once referred to me as delicate, laughing like it was a joke. Had they sat together and built a case using my own medical history as evidence? The answer came from the last person I expected. I ran into Eli, Daniel's older brother, outside a downtown office building. His tie was loose, his eyes tired like a man carrying something too heavy for his frame. He said my name the way people say the names of the recently dead. He pulled me aside and told me what he hadn't been able to stop thinking about for months. Catherine had handed him my medical file. She'd shown him a draft prenuptial agreement she'd drawn up without Daniel's knowledge. She'd told Eli that I was financially unstable, emotionally unreliable, a risk to the family's assets and reputation. She'd asked him to help convince Daniel to end things before the wedding. She played all of us, Eli said, staring at his own hands. I believed her because she was my mother, and Mara was always right there nodding along, filling in details I didn't even think to question. I stood there and understood something I hadn't let myself fully see before. This wasn't a family drama. This was a coordinated operation. Catherine had recruited her own children as instruments, used my private vulnerabilities as weapons, and executed the plan with the kind of precision that doesn't come from emotion. It comes from premeditation. Control doesn't stop on its own. So I decided to stop it myself. The day I filed suit, the courthouse clerk stamped my paperwork without glancing up. But that sound, sharp, mechanical, final, hit me somewhere deep. For the first time in months, I wasn't in a defensive position. I was the one moving forward. The case: Merritt v. Whitfield and Merritt. Breach of privacy, intentional infliction of emotional distress, financial damages. Discovery is a remarkable thing. It has no patience for carefully constructed stories. Emails surfaced showing Mara forwarding my vendor contracts directly to Catherine. Bank records revealed deposits into Mara's account that corresponded neatly to withdrawals from my wedding fund. Eli, pale and exhausted but resolute, agreed to testify. The courtroom was quiet in the way that matters, the kind of quiet where every word lands with full weight. Catherine arrived composed, tailored suit, chin elevated, the posture of a woman who has always controlled the room. Mara followed 2 steps behind, the smile I'd known my whole life now looking like a costume she hadn't bothered to change out of. My attorney laid out the evidence methodically, like dismantling something piece by piece. When my medical records were displayed, passed between legal teams, cited in testimony, treated as exhibits in a case about my own life, I watched the judge's expression shift. Not dramatically, just a small deliberate tightening around the eyes that said, "This is not acceptable." Catherine took the stand. She answered questions with the fluency of someone who had rehearsed. But cross-examination has its own gravity. Yes, she had shared my private medical information. Yes, she had drafted a prenuptial agreement without my knowledge. No, she didn't believe she had done anything wrong. She was protecting her son. The gallery murmured. When Mara was called, it was the first time I'd seen her in a room where she couldn't manage the atmosphere. The emails were projected on a screen behind her, her own name highlighted in the header. Her voice cracked when she said she hadn't understood the implications. But the words on that screen didn't crack. They held perfectly still. I sat straight. I breathed slowly. Because no matter what story they had told about me, fragile, unstable, lesser, the evidence told a different one. And in that room, under oath, the evidence was the only voice that mattered. The verdict came down 3 weeks later. Damages awarded, breach of privacy upheld, emotional distress claim validated, financial losses confirmed. But here's the thing about victory. Sometimes the number on the check matters less than the words that precede it. What I heard, in a room full of strangers and witnesses, and people who had once dismissed me, was a formal legal declaration that what had been done to me was wrong. That I had not imagined it. That I had not been too sensitive or too paranoid or too much. Catherine's face lost its color as the ruling was read aloud. Mara pressed her hands over her eyes, but no one moved toward her. For once, the performance wasn't working. Outside, the press was waiting. Cameras, microphones, questions pressing in from every side. I didn't give a speech. I didn't have one prepared. I just walked down those courthouse steps with my shoulders back and my head level, and for the first time in over a year, I didn't feel like someone recovering from something. I felt like myself. That evening, I sat on my apartment floor with a shoebox I'd kept under my bed for months. Inside, a canceled invitation printed on heavy cream stock, a copy of the seating chart with my name removed, a fabric swatch from my original wedding dress. For a long time, these had felt like proof of everything I'd lost. I lit a match, and one by one, I fed them to the flame. Watching them curl and blacken and turn to nothing, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not relief exactly, but a kind of completion. These pieces had never really been my loss. They were evidence of my survival. And now I didn't need evidence anymore. I had the verdict. I had my own name, intact, in a world that had tried to quietly remove it. My story didn't end with a wedding dress and a venue and a date on a calendar. It ended with me deciding who I was going to be on the other side of all of it. If you've ever been made to feel small by the people who were supposed to hold you up, if you've been silenced, replaced, or quietly written out of your own story, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not what they decided about you. You are what you choose to do with what happened. Silence protects the people who are counting on your silence, and you don't owe them that anymore. If this story stayed with you, I'd like to hear yours in the comments. Not because sharing is easy, but because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is refuse to disappear.